Hello, everybody. Well, and by everybody I mean 6th hour. This is quite possibly the most awkward thing I've ever done in my entire life. Especially because as I started filming this, I realized this is backwards. But the good news is, at this point, you should have your Chromebook open, and you should have your notes packet, and you should be able to copy down as I'm going through this and be able to actually see the slides for real. But I'm going to keep this up here because I have a purpose. That way, if I'm pointing at certain things on the map, you can hopefully get a generalized idea as to what I'm actually talking about, even though, like I said, it's backwards. I wonder if I can flip this around post-edit. We'll see. Alrighty, so today we are going to start off with our geography of ancient Egypt and Kush. Now at this point you really don't know much about Kush, and that is A-okay. We won't talk about Kush a lot, and I'll explain why in the future. So go ahead and get out your Chromebooks, go to the slideshow, this thing right here. Go ahead and get your notes packets, and they should be the very first thing. We're starting Egypt today. Alright, Miss Walker, if you need to pause this, go ahead and do so. All right, slide number 1. Where were ancient Egypt and Kush? So, ancient Egypt is going to be located in northeast Africa along the Nile River. Now, that's kind of the crazy thing, and most people, when you ask them, oh, what continent is Egypt on? Most people think like somewhere in Asia, kind of close to Mesopotamia. Well, they're not wrong. They're just not right. Because actually, Egypt is in the very top part of Africa. So it's hard to see, but behind this writing is the very top of Africa. And if you go in the right-hand corner, I actually got that right, and I didn't even put up my hands for that. Over here, really close, you're gonna see that this right here is modern-day Egypt, the country of Egypt. If we go directly over in this corner, if the map continued to go, that is where we're going to see Mesopotamia, and specifically, some of you guys were noticing on our intro to Egypt that we actually saw that a lot of the current events we're talking about Israel and the war in Palestine and with Gaza and everything. That's because Israel is right here in this corner. We can actually see it on the screen. So, when we're talking about like Egypt, we're talking about Africa, but it's very, very close to Asia as well. But when we asked it on the test, Africa. Kush is going to be a kingdom that is going to also be very, very close to ancient Egypt, but it is not a modern day country. This is now like modern day Nubia, and it is going to be right underneath ancient Egypt. And the main thing that's going to separate these two places is going to be something called a cataract. We'll get to that in just a second. So like I said, Kush was a kingdom that also lived along the Nile River and was located south of ancient Egypt in a land called Nubia. The Nile River is traditionally considered the longest river in the world, with a length of over 4,000 miles, and made civilization possible in Egypt and Nubia. Now, a question that I get a lot of is some people are like, no, Mrs. Davis, I've heard that the largest river is not the Nile River, it's the Amazon River. Well, you're not wrong. Again, the largest river, like the width, is going to be the Amazon River. The longest river is going to be the Nile River. So that is a test question, and you may want to put a little star by it or something like that, but honestly, I bet you'll be able to remember, because the Nile River is kind of the main river we talk about in this unit. So if you get that wrong, I might be a little concerned for you, but that's okay. We still love you. We believe in you. All right, Mrs. Walker, this is a wonderful time to pause if they're not finished writing this down. Alrighty, moving on. All right, next question is, where is the Nile River? The Nile River is made up of 2 tributaries. And Cam, we already know you know about these 2 tributaries because on your intro to Egypt, all you want to do is go hunting and all the things in the water. So you have to, do the white Nile and the blue Nile and the regular Nile and all that. I'm still going to hold that against you. Okay, the 2 tributaries are going to meet up in Nubia, which is the modern day country of Sudan. So I technically told you wrong on that last slide. Like, Kush is more the modern day country of Sudan, not Nubia. A tributary is a small river that flows into a larger river. And I'm sure you guys can think of some examples that we even have today of things that flow even into like the Arkansas River that we have here that would be examples of smaller. Those would be tributaries because the Arkansas River would be more of the larger river. The White Nile, and I'm going to move this over just the tiniest bit so you can see a little bit more. The White Nile is going to start at Lake Victoria, which is down here at the bottom. And it is in the modern day country of Tanzania. And then the Blue Nile, so you can see it's like labeled as the White Nile, and it goes up and it meets up in Khartoum. So it's all of this going through Uganda, South Sudan, and they meet up in Sudan. And then Lake Tana is where the Blue Nile starts, and that's in the modern day country of Ethiopia. And it is going to go ahead and meet up in Khartoum with the White Nile, where then they become just one single Nile River. Okay, the Nile starts in the south near the modern day city of Khartoum, Sudan. It flows to the north where it ends at the Mediterranean Sea. So you guys, this is probably one of the most important things that you get out of this today. And in fact, I'm even going to talk about it on the next slide because that's how important it is. So we have this river does not flow how we would think it would. Because when you look at a map, you're like, oh, the river flows down. Well, yeah, it actually does flow down, but it's not the way we think of. So down here by Lake Victoria, these are actually mountains. And this is a lot higher of an elevation. And as we know, water is going to flow down a river. Or I'm sorry, it's going to flow down a mountain. It's not going to flow up a mountain. That's not how gravity works. So as we go, this is a higher elevation down here. And up here is actually a lower elevation. So this is flowing, as you see these arrows, it's flowing down towards the Mediterranean Sea. So once again, in case you're confused, up here is actually a taller elevation. This would be considered mountains. So I'm going to draw a little awkward mountains over here. And it's flowing down in elevation towards the Mediterranean Sea. We're going to go over that again in just a minute. All right, Miss Walker? That's your cue. Alrighty, so the features of the Nile River. You guys are going to very much have already kind of understood and talked a little bit about these because these are vocab words. So the southern boundary of the Nile River was at a cataract near the modern day city of Aswan. So this is where we're kind of close to, well, we're getting closer to Kush. So Aswan is right here on our map. It's towards the middle. It's close to Lake Nasser. And a cataract is a section of the Nile River with rapids and rocky terrain. And this is what I usually think of. When I think of a cataract, I'm thinking of like whitewater rafting. Like it is super bumpy, rocky, like the water is splashing everywhere. And it's not really something you're gonna want to take a boat through. It's gonna act as a natural boundary because especially back in their day, the boats that they had, their sailboats are not going to survive. They're going to crash and then drown. And so they don't wanna have that. So this cataract gets to be called the first cataract because it is going to mark the official boundary between Egypt and Nubia. That's nice. It's going to protect the Kushites because they're not going to get attacked by the really large empire of Egypt because the Egyptians aren't going to want to take all of their supplies down the Nile River and hit those cataracts. Okay, I am going to move on, but again, Ms. Walker, if you need to pause this, go ahead, let them copy this down. The second feature is another vocab word, and this is going to be the delta. So, as water, this is like science, and I'm not a sciencey person, so the fact that I can understand this, hopefully this means you will too. But as water travels through a river, it's going to pick up soil and sediment through erosion. That's just how the process works. It picks it up. If you scoop out a big thing of some water, you're obviously going to have like soil and dust particles and things in that water. As the water is rapidly moving, it's going to pick up even more soil. And what is going to happen is before that water reaches a larger body of water, the water slows down because there's not as large of the currents and it's not as quickly moving. So instead, as that water slows down and kind of spreads out into the Mediterranean Sea, it's going to drop those particles because gravity and all of the, physics and forces that I don't quite understand, they're going to be not as strong. And so they're going to let down and they're going to drop some of that soil and sediment. That is going to create the northern boundary, which is a river delta where the Nile River separated into several smaller branches and empties into the Mediterranean Sea. It's a fan-shaped region that is created when soil is deposited at the end of the river. So as the Nile River, remember there's mountains down here, it's traveling down the mountains into the lower elevation, and as it travels up here, before it goes into the Mediterranean Sea, it fans out and it slowly lets down that soil and settlement. Now, as we know, in order to have really, really good fertile soil, we have to have some of that, like dust and particles that are being brought. They're bringing the nutrients with them. So this is going to be the largest area where people actually live because this is going to have the most fertile of all the soils and be the best for irrigation and farmland. For those of you guys that had incentive, for you this was today, but like yesterday, you will have remembered we talked about this. On that very front of your worksheet, the biggest place where we have people actually settle in Egypt is by the Nile River Delta because again, best farmland, best soil, best irrigation. You have access to the Mediterranean Sea to be able to go and trade and so much more. Okay, Miss Walker? Excellent time to pause. Alrighty, next question. Why did the Egyptians live along the Nile River? Well, I feel like I kind of ruined that just a little bit, but we're just going to continue with it anyways. So, ancient Egypt was covered by desert and received very little rainfall. I mean, hello, it's in Africa. It's pretty close to Mesopotamia, and we knew that place was very hot. It's not a very good place to, have, crops. So, the Nile was the primary source of water in the region. Again, for those of you guys that were here today for Incentive Day and had to do the worksheet, you remember we labeled, there was 3 deserts that are on either side of the Nile River. And you did not want to go live in the desert because you're going to die from starvation and dehydration. The Egyptians are going to call their land Kemet, or the black land, due to the dark color of the fertile soil along the Nile River. If you actually look up some pictures, you can see that there's some areas where it actually does look, the soil is so dark that it's almost got a black color to it, and it kind of looks like a black sand almost. But then other places, it's a lot lighter. The surrounding desert was known as Destret, and this is the red land, and was avoided because there is no water sources. I feel like everyone knows that. You don't go walking in the desert, you don't live in the desert because you're not gonna have water and you're gonna die from dehydration. I feel like that's a no-brainer, right? Hopefully, right? Okay. The Nile flooded over its banks around the same time during summer and fall each year, so farmers could confidently plan their growing and harvesting seasons around this time. This is gonna be the biggest difference between Mesopotamia and Egypt when it comes to farming. Is remember in Mesopotamia, their rainfall was at random times. They sometimes got a lot of rainfall, they sometimes had no rainfall, they sometimes had a lot of flooding, they sometimes had no flooding. They might plant their crops and then the flooding comes. It was the whole thing they could not really completely plan for. Whereas in Egypt, they knew right around the same time at this month and this month were going to be the rainfall seasons. And so they could very confidently know, okay, during this month, this is where we're going to plant our stuff. I'm actually not going to tell you this because in one of our simulations, there's going to be a game question on that. So I'm not going to tell you which month that is. The Egyptians used irrigation to grow a surplus of food, just like the civilizations in Mesopotamia. And when they have a surplus of food, that means that not every single person has to be a farmer. But fun fact, actually 98% of people in Egypt, ancient Egypt that is, were farmers. So it was still a very heavy and prevalent occupation at that time. All right, Miss Waka. All right, I hope I'm getting close because I'm almost running out of time. Oh, man, okay, we're gonna have to talk fast. Either way, because you guys in 6 hours are actually gonna be here in like 5 minutes, so I gotta get going. Okay, what else helped civilization succeed in ancient Egypt? The Nile River was located nearby several natural barriers. Now you're going to see this stuff that's in black up here on the screen and in your slideshow. That's not in your notes. This is just more like some extra bonus material for me to help explain to you. A natural barrier, hopefully you remember this from our first unit. A natural barrier is any physical feature, such as a mountain, such as a desert, such as a sea, anything like that that's going to make travel difficult, and that means it's much more difficult for another country to come and attack you, but also means that trade makes it a little bit harder as well. So the following are going to be the natural barriers around ancient Egypt. At the top, we have the Mediterranean Sea. On the left-hand side, we have the Western Desert. On the right-hand side, we have the Eastern Desert. The Red Sea, which hopefully you remember was way too salty to drink, and the Nile River cataracts, which are going to prevent Egypt attacking Kush, which is great for them. All right, for the sake of time, I'm going to keep on moving. So Ms. Walker, you can totally pause this whenever you need to. Okay, what were the regions of ancient Egypt? So this is going to mimic the flowing of the Nile River. So Egypt was originally divided into two regions. We have Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. And again, it's backwards. It's different than what you would think of when you look at it on a map because it follows the flow of the Nile River. Because again, it is flowing from the bottom to the top because it's going down the mountain. So Upper Egypt is actually the southern or bottom part of Egypt, and Lower Egypt is actually the northern or top part of Egypt because it's flowing towards the Mediterranean Sea. Southern Egypt was referred to as this upper half because the Nile River started there, while Northern Egypt was known as the lower half since the Nile ended there. You guys, I'm going to drill this point into you because it is a test question and you need to know it. Okay. Again, Ms. Walker, go ahead and pause whenever you're ready. Okay, we have one more slide and I have approximately 3 minutes. Let's do this. Okay, what was the geography like in Kush? Okay, so we don't talk a lot about Kush, not because I don't love them. In fact, I kind of think they're cool people. They have like a really cool like script and stuff, and they, you know, have elephants, and it just, yeah, there's some really cool stuff there. But Kush, we can't translate their writing system, and we haven't found a lot of key details or artifacts about the Kushites, and so as a result, we don't really know a lot about them. So the fact that I only have one slide about their geography is because we don't know it. If I knew it, I'd love to tell you it. I just don't. The Kushites, like the Egyptians, we do know, depended on the floods of the Nile River to grow their crops. Although, we do know that Kush received more rainfall than the Egyptians, so that's nice for them. Kush was located near the cataracts of the Nile, which provided a natural barrier from the Egyptians like we've talked about. But it also made transportation dangerous across the river, which if I was in class, we would talk about how that would affect the Kushites and their development as a civilization. So maybe if Miss Walker wants to pause and you guys can throw out some ideas, you totally can. But if not, I'm going to pause for just a second and then I'm going to talk about a couple of them. Okay, so some of the things that I would say is, number one, it's going to make it difficult for them to trade. We know that, obviously. They're not going to be able to travel. They're going to have to find other routes. And it's in the desert and you're going to die. So it's going to be difficult. Second thing, it's going to be hard to expand their empire. Kush is only going to be able to stay in that one region because everyone else is to the north and to the northeast. And so they can't really expand their empire. It's also going to be difficult to get food, access to new resources. I mean, there's just so many things where we're going to see this as a negative, but at least they're protected. The Kushites did have access, though, to several of their own resources, such as gold and ivory, which I talked to you about. They have elephants, and elephants is where they're getting the ivory from, which is also very sad. And at some point I need to tell you about my pet elephant that I used to have, even though he wasn't actually mine, but I thought he was mine like for my entire, elementary school years, until I finally realized that there's no way that Pookie could have actually been mine because my parents couldn't have afforded an elephant, but I totally thought that he was mine. We'll talk about that. Just remind me. I'll actually say something. But also they had access to gold, which made them a very wealthy empire, and is also part of the reason why Egypt so badly wanted to conquer them. But this is going to eventually allow them to grow wealthy through trade with Egypt and other civilizations, because they are going to eventually figure out other ways. Oh no, the bell just rang. Okay, real quick. Woo! And so as a result, what was I trying to say? I don't even remember. Something about Egypt. Oh yeah, but yeah, Egypt eventually takes them over and it's really bad. Okay, well, now that the bells ring, I'm going to end this right here, because this has been really weird talking to myself, and literally you guys are about to show up in any second. So I love you all. I hope you had a wonderful day. Make sure you copy down these slides. Now you guys can play a book it when you're done. Merry Christmas!